Beth, thanks for taking out time this afternoon to talk with me and share your story and your interest with this larger audience. And maybe a good place to start is how you came to this topic of educational research, teacher education. Can you tell us a little bit about that pathway that got you there?
Yeah, sure. So I was a teacher. I was a high school teacher. I taught high school English and communication. And I remember vividly having to sign up for some professional development days, like activities that was going to happen on a professional development day. And one of the days was focused on exercise. And as teachers, we had to go sign up for some exercise activities. And we could do, at the time, it was like aerobics, or step, there were all these different kinds of things. And I thought, this has nothing to do with me teaching in the classroom. And I've been teaching for about 4 years, and I thought, this is not advancing me in any way professionally. Now, in hindsight, it was probably had something to do with health and wellness and taking care of yourself. But at the time, I really thought this is not making me a better teacher.
Widely shared. If you talk to teachers in most systems, 6 to 10 days a year, there's some sort of teacher professional development that's supposed to be occurring in the schools.
Right.
And by and large, there's a sense that most of it is low quality and, if not, meaningless.
Yeah. So that then provoked me to start asking questions about how you support new teachers in the profession. And that's then when I went to graduate school to begin to study those questions.
Okay, but I got to dig deeper.
Yeah.
Why were you a teacher? How did you get to be a teacher in the first place?
Oh, okay. So I actually had a high school teacher. I was in an honors English class, and she asked me to work in the writing center. So I worked with students in the writing center, helping them think about their writing. And I must have been junior or senior year in high school, and I was having a conversation with her and another high school English teacher who both asked me what I planned to do after high school. And I had other ideas. I thought I might be an architect or an attorney. Those were kind of the two things I had thought I might do. And they both looked at me thinking I was crazy, that my path was to become an English teacher. And at the time, their high school teachers actually have a lot of influence on you. So I thought, well, maybe that's something they see in me that I don't really recognize as a talent. And so I then pursued that.
So you went off to pursue your PhD at Northwestern. They're known for expertise in this particular area of work. Can you tell me a little bit about that program, and then what drew you here to UCI School of Education?
Sure. So that's actually a really interesting question. So I was teaching, and I enrolled actually in a one-year master's program at Northwestern, and it was a really life-transforming experience for me. The kinds of people I encountered, the ideas I encountered, I just thought I had struck gold. And so while I was there, I engaged in research with some faculty, and who then invited me to continue in the PhD program. I wasn't quite sure I would do a PhD at that time. So I actually waited, held off. I worked in a couple of research labs, then re-enrolled in the PhD program when they hired someone whose specialty was on teacher development and teacher learning. And as I pursued my PhD, I had some really great experiences working with Miriam Sharon there. And at about my third year, I saw a posting for a position at UC Irvine for someone whose area of specialty was teacher preparation and teacher development. And that's unusual. You usually see jobs in like math education, science education, but this was really targeting teacher learning. That was my third year of graduate school. And then I saw it again my fourth year of graduate school, and then it was still posted my fifth year. So my fifth year, I applied for the job.
Yeah. Otherwise, we'd still be posting it.
Yes. That might be.
And then you came to UCI and have really been a leader here in how this unit's been thinking about teacher education for a long time now. Tell me a little bit about your work in teacher education here at UCI.
So when I first, after 2 or 3 years being here, I got a small fellowship and did a little project to study teachers, pre-service teachers' use of video in teacher preparation. And my experiences working with the folks in the teacher prep program, I sort of realized these are some really great people and we could try some innovative things. I got tenure, I started thinking about what I wanted to do post-tenure, and meanwhile the field was asking some important questions about teacher preparation. So at that time I went on sabbatical and invited the teacher ed folks to my house and bought some poster paper, and we imagined possibilities at UCI. Of the UC schools, we have the most faculty who think about teacher preparation, so I thought that was an opportunity here. And we had these committed folks who work in the teacher prep program. So combined, I thought there was an opportunity to start imagining possibilities to contribute to the broader conversation in the field.
Right. And another thing that I find really noteworthy here is we think of that program as a model program, not as a place to generate income. And you see in a lot of schools of education, these programs are run often with inadequate investment to bring in revenue to the school, and we have the exact opposite approach, that this is about quality. So you've been director of the teacher education group, leading these conversations about rethinking how the unit's doing teacher education, and then I came here. You got convinced to come on as associate dean. I know that was a hard decision for you, given everything else you had going on in your life, research and otherwise. What motivated you to join me in this administrative work?
So I think there were two things. So one would be that I think when you came here, you sort of brought attention to teaching and learning that had not been as much of a focus in the discourse in the school. And I was really excited about having a leader who was going to be really making the work of K-12 education and teaching and learning central to what this school can contribute to Orange County and also to the broader national conversation. I think that was one thing that was really exciting. And then I think the other part was that when you talk about the work that you want to do, this outward-facing work in communities, really brings meaning to the work that we're doing here as a school. So for me, my work has to feel meaningful to the people who the work is about, right? To improving teaching and learning for kids in classrooms and improving the learning for teachers who are engaging in that work, and in Orange County. So I think that focus was something that you brought to the school, and I was just really excited to be a part of that initiative.
You've advanced this idea of teacher noticing as one way that teachers can improve their own practice. Can you unpack that
Sure.
term concept for us, teacher noticing?
Yeah, so a good way to think about it is that I think teachers make something like 200 decisions, 250 decisions in the moment of one classroom lesson. And so what that tells us is that they're paying attention to a lot of different things at any given moment. There's a lot of visual and auditory stimuli coming their way, along with there's human beings in the classroom. So when we think about teacher noticing, we're thinking about what are they paying attention to and how are they reasoning about it to make informed teaching decisions. So we can think about it that in a classroom, it's pretty common in the US that we take kind of a behaviorist approach. So teachers spend a lot of time paying attention to classroom behavior. Are students being compliant? Are they following the rules? And less time to the kinds of ideas that students are contributing, what those ideas mean, and how they can use kids' ideas to move learning forward. And that idea of being attentive to kids' ideas is really central to what the Common Core standards, the standards, the NGSS standards, but even in Common Core standards and next generation science standards, those are sort of a beginning, but this idea of attending to kids' thinking is central to what we know about good learning, regardless of standards, right? So being compliant doesn't necessarily mean you're going to move kids' learning forward. Paying attention to kids' thinking is a way that you can move kids' learning forward.
Right, in a context where there's so much noise and distractors in the environment, right, where the teacher really has to be trained to focus and look for this with students, right?
Yes, I mean, exactly. I mean, there's so much going on, right? So they have to learn how to begin to pay attention to kids' thinking. But kids' thinking is really complicated because a teacher's teaching something that they've sort of acquired expertise around, but then they have to sort of step back and almost abandon that expertise and put themselves in the shoes of the learner and try to listen from where the learner is, from where that learner's coming, which is really complicated. Imagine, you have 30 or 40 of those learners in your classroom. They're all coming from different places. So you really have to be attentive to where they're each coming from.
And this body of work you're doing, you have this really innovative measurement approach to trying to get at this, what teachers are thinking and noticing at a particular moment. Can you describe that for us?
Yeah, so one thing that we do is we go in and videotape in teachers' classrooms, and then we flag segments where we see either interesting moments of kids thinking emerging, or where we see teachers being particularly attentive to kids' ideas, as well as being attentive to patterns of participation, who's getting to participate, and teachers trying to bring in learners who might not always participate. So we flag those moments, and then we'll sit down with a teacher very soon after, and we'll show them those moments of the video, and we'll ask them to talk to us about what they're thinking during those moments. And then they'll tell us all about the kinds of things that they were attending to. And when we listen to that, we really get a sense of all of the cognitive work of teaching and how they are really engaged in a lot of thinking every single moment that they're in the moment of the work of teaching.
That's great. And this approach of using videos and then having teachers talk about it, it's not just you, but other of your colleagues, our colleagues here in the teacher education program, are also kind of at the forefront of this movement, right?
Yeah, I mean, so video is becoming used in so many ways now, and it's in the last 5 years, the advances in video technology are allowing it to be used widespread in teacher preparation. One of the great things with our teacher candidates, many of them have phones that can capture video. They'll be in their classrooms, they capture video of kids talking, they upload it on, while they're on the site, they come back here, we watch it together, and we talk about what kids are saying. So with the advances of video technology, the teachers are able to do so much more than they were even just 2 or 3 years ago.
Right, and also, one of the challenges always of being a classroom teacher was, even though it was incredibly social, it was also isolating, right?
Right.
That you didn't have often mechanism to share the practice, the challenges you were facing, because you were the only adult in the room. So you've now created these mechanisms. I think of this video club as one such mechanism, where you're not just using the video capture, but you're creating a community around that. Tell us about that.
Okay, so a video club is a lot like a book club. So a book club, people read the same book, they come together and they talk about it. And the idea behind a video club is that teachers come together and watch video artifacts of classroom practice. And one of the things I think that in my work I've done a little bit differently from others is that a lot of times we have teachers watch video of themselves or more expert teachers and try to figure out what they're doing, and then we ask them to go do that themselves. And in my work, I think one of the hardest things for teachers to do is to identify those moments that are where kids are saying really interesting things, and then to do some questioning and what we call engaging in discourse with those kids around those ideas. So in a video club, we actually don't often show videos of the practicing teachers. We show videos of the kids, and we try to capture kids thinking. And then we, in the video club, we try to engage in the practices of probing kids' thinking and the ways we would want them to do it in their teaching. And one of the most rewarding moments, I have to say, when I was doing my dissertation data collection was there was a student at the board solving a multiplication of decimals problem, and the teacher really did not understand what was happening. And he is asking all these questions of her, and then he turned to me afterward and he said, "Now that's going to be a good clip for our video club." He knew that that's the kind of thing that is worth studying with his colleagues.
And then the discourse of the video club itself becomes a model for how to approach this work, right?
Yeah, and I think we think about how are we going to prepare teachers to ask kids questions and become curious about kids' ideas, and how do we get them to probe interesting mathematical ideas. And when we give them a list of questions to ask, that's useful, but that has to happen in the moment, right? It's very much in the moment. So by watching video and sort of modeling and participating in a place where we're asking questions of the kids thinking represented in video, I think the teachers, and some of my research shows this, is that the teachers come to take on those roles and they start asking those kinds of questions in the video club, and then we see them asking those questions in their classrooms.
Yeah, so you create such a high bar for all of us, because not only in the methods and approaches themselves, you're trying to embody the principles of better teaching, to better, and I know it's also a challenge for us as administrators here, where we feel this incredible burden that we want this place to be a model for how we do, not only we do educational research, but how we approach teaching and serving our own students. I thought maybe you could say a little bit about your thinking around the TA question as an example of that, how we think about grad students, deploying them as teachers in the classroom.
Yeah, I mean, I guess before I answer that, I will say I think I try to take kind of an improvement approach, that humans should be in an improvement position. So we should be thinking about how can we day to day try to improve in the work that we're doing without judgment, without evaluation, and that the work that we're all doing is really hard, and if we can incrementally improve, we're going to get better at it. And so when we think about that with TAs, for example, I think we can think about as faculty, how do we think about being a teaching assistant as a way to mentor them into the work of being a professor. That part of being a professor is thinking carefully about your teaching and thinking about how you can help others learn how to think through a course, and how to think through your pedagogical practices that you're going to use with learners. And then think about, well, what does that mean to scaffold them to take on more roles in the classroom? So I think we have to think about teaching assistants as part of their training for graduate school, because we want them to take on these positions that we have and become really effective teachers at the university level.
So I know when you talk about teacher education and your approach to education more generally around this improvement science logic, you often speak about a theory of action around your work. Share that with the audience. What's a theory of action?
So I think of teaching as, I guess this maybe goes back to me wanting to at one point be an architect, right? I think of teaching as a design activity. There are constraints on the design. You only have 50 minutes. You only have 182 days. And so you have to really be thinking about the trade-offs that you're going to make in that space. And you have to think about what's the learning I want to accomplish at the end, and then what are the pieces that are going to get me there, both in terms of the content that I want people to learn, so what knowledge do I want them to acquire, but also what kinds of practices do I want people to engage in to get there. As you well know, what it means to be a scientist, what it means to do science is very different now than it was 40 years ago, 20 years ago, given the way technology has changed. So we need to think about people as doers, and then also what kind of person do we want people to become. So I think being really explicit about that is a theory of action. At the end, I want them to be at this point. What do I, if I'm going to design a learning activity, how do I see them moving through that space? And what's my theory that this design is going to get them there?
And you mentioned this research practice partnership, but for the larger audience that isn't steeped in this institutional improvement science, logic. What's a research practice partnership? The other term out there, network improvement community. What are those things? Help us.
Yeah. So research practice partnership can take on lots of different forms, as you know. So you can imagine that faculty could partner with a school district because there's been such a movement around data in schools that some of our faculty could be working with their data, helping them do some analysis of that data, and then take it back to a school district and help maybe give them some ideas of what's important in that data and some ways that they might move forward. That's been a really promising model, but I think more recently we have seen with the influence of the Carnegie Foundation for improving teaching and learning, another model, which is called an improvement science approach, where you really work alongside communities and you bring teams of people who have different kinds of expertise to shed light on a problem, to understand a problem, and then co-construct together solutions, and then iterate on trying them out. And so what that means then to measure these problems is really different from the kinds of standard measures that we've been relying on. Now it's the people in the community are creating the measures, and they're tracking data on a very quick cycle to get information on the impact of innovations that they try. I mean, nowadays we have kids who take these standardized tests. Those are really important for a school district, but you get that information, 4 months after the kids have left. They're already a year older. They're in a grade ahead. So that can tell you some things, but with an improvement approach, you create much more small-scale measures that give you quick feedback so you can then iterate and improve in real time, essentially.
Yeah. And with the technology today, often not just college kids, but also K-12 kids are engaged in these learning management systems where a lot of their day-to-day learning activities is captured already, and you can build an improvement science around.
Yeah, I was thinking my kids' school gives them access to their grades, and so every day they can go online and see how well they did on a test or something, and it makes me crazy because it's promoting this very performance-based kind of idea, right? That how am I performing today? How am I performing today? And I think if they could replace that with 5 questions, that they could ask kids and every day, and the kids just go in and answer these 5 questions. How did I feel today? Did anyone ask me a question about an idea I had? Did I get to work collaboratively with someone, right? I mean, we could imagine what these 5 questions could be, and a school could get really great information within a week or 2 weeks about what's going on in their schools, classrooms.
Something I know you've talked to me about before, and that is this idea that we need to build systems if we're serious about improving teacher education or teacher instruction. We're not going to be able to do that without putting new systems in place.
So I think as part of, I mentioned earlier, bringing the group from the teacher education program and we talked about what are some imaginings that we could have. And because of the way California thinks about teacher preparation as being a sort of post-baccalaureate endeavor, so they have about 9 to 15 months, depending on what program you're in. It's also really thought of as the first of 3 years of the credential. You don't get cleared for your credential until 2 years after you start teaching, or potentially more. And so if that's the case, then we have to really think about teacher preparation as not just the time that they're at the university, but we have to be interfacing with the school districts to be thinking about how we develop a shared vision of what a beginning teacher should know. What's the trajectory of growth in beginning teaching? What does it mean to be a teacher the first day of school? What's it mean to be of the first year, the first day of the school of the second year, the first day of school of the third year, and how can we move them closer to that? And we know that teachers gain expertise by about their 5th to 8 years. It takes about 5 to 8 years. So if we can be strategic in working with Orange County schools to really develop a vision of good beginning teaching, to your point, in a networked improvement community where we have representatives from different districts and we're collecting data on that over time, we can collectively be responsible for developing the teaching workforce. It's not any one person's responsibility. But we're really collectively thinking about how we're developing beginning teachers and then supporting them so that they stay in the profession.
Right. And if we could do that here, it really could be a model for the country as a whole.
Yeah.
You also talked before to me about the importance of thinking about local context and variation. So it is absolutely true that Orange County is the 6th largest county in the country, but the other significant fact is its incredible demographic diversity. And you have within Orange County all these communities that vary tremendously in terms of individual background, culture, income and the like. How does that impact the work of teacher training?
So I think a way to think about it is that the Institute for Education Sciences, for example, has developed the What Works Clearinghouse. And that gives us a lot of information about interventions that have been successful. But typically those sort of look at the average, right? And so they'll study this in a lot of contexts, but then we sort of get the average. This worked generally for a large population of people. But the question we have to be asking is, for whom did it work? Under what conditions did it work? And what's the variation in these interventions working in different settings and contexts? So we can see that an intervention can be quite successful in some settings, but not successful at all in other settings. But that gets hidden when you look at averages, right? And so what we have to start doing is, to your point about developing a more systemic approach to teacher preparation, we have to really be thinking about who are the students in these different school districts? Who are the learners? And when we think about supporting learning in these different school districts, what does it need to look like to be a teacher, for example, who learns from practice if you work in Garden Grove, if you work in Westminster, if you work in Anaheim Union High School District? What does it look like? Because those students are different, and the cultures and communities are different. And so while we know that learning from practice and we have different strategies and ideas of how to do that, those things likely have to be adapted and look different in each of those settings. And we just have to think about what that variation needs to look like.
Thank you for coming to talk with us today and share your wisdom with this larger audience. And then I also want to thank you for serving in this administrative position with me. I'm deeply, deeply grateful to have your help and partnership in doing this work that we're doing together.
And I will respond by saying thank you for giving me the opportunity and for taking our school to sort of the next level. It's great to be a part of what we're doing here.